Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive.
It's great to be back.
Today we're going deep on a strategy that I think is particularly fascinating. It's all about taking an attack and flipping it to your advantage.
It sounds intriguing.
We're looking at strategy, #9 from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene.
Turn the tables, the counterattack strategy.
Exactly. And by the end of this deep dive, you'll understand why a calculated counterattack can be so powerful and how you can apply this principle in your own life, whether it's in business leadership or just your personal interactions.
I'm ready to learn.
We've got some really cool examples, both from history and modern times, that will illustrate how this strategy plays out.
I always love those.
So let's get right into it. Why is a counterattack such a surprisingly strong move? What makes it so effective?
You know, when you're attacked, your first instinct is usually to defend yourself, right? Maybe even retreat.
Yeah, you want to protect yourself.
But some of the greatest strategists in history have actually seen an attack not as a threat, but as an opportunity.
An opportunity to do what?
To completely shift the balance of power.
To turn the tables on their attacker.
Exactly. It's about using the force of their aggression against them.
So it's not just about observing the blow, but using their momentum to your advantage.
Precisely.
Do you have an example that comes to mind?
Well, one of the most famous examples is the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805. It's a classic illustration of the counterattack strategy in action.
Napoleon, right?
That's right. Napoleon was facing a much larger coalition of Russian and Austrian forces.
So how did he use a counterattack in this situation?
Well, instead of trying to appear strong, Napoleon actually did something quite clever.
What did he do?
He intentionally projected an image of weakness, particularly on his right flank.
He wanted the enemy to think he was vulnerable there.
Exactly, and that's precisely what happened. The Allied forces saw this apparent weakness and decided to launch a major attack on Napoleon's right flank.
They thought they had him cornered.
They did. But this was all part of Napoleon's plan. Precisely. He had secretly positioned his main forces elsewhere, and once the Allies were fully committed to the attack on his right, he unleashed a devastating counterattack right through their weakened center.
So he used their own aggression against them.
Exactly. The suddenness and the force of Napoleon's counterattack completely caught the Allies off guard. They were expecting to push him back, but instead they found themselves divided, disrupted, and their line of retreat threatened.
It completely changed the momentum of the battle.
Yes, the Allies' overconfidence and their eagerness to exploit what they perceived as a weakness ultimately led to their defeat.
That's such a powerful example of turning the tables.
It really is.
Now, in the 33 Strategies of War, Robert Greene outlines 3 specific outcomes that a well-executed counterattack can achieve.
That's right. The first one is surprise.
Which makes sense if you think about it. When you attack someone, you're not expecting them to suddenly come back at you with even more force.
Right. You're expecting them to either defend or retreat. So when they counterattack, it throws you off balance. It disrupts your plans.
It's like a psychological blow.
Exactly. The second outcome is a shift in momentum.
You're taking control away from the attacker.
Precisely. And often this leads to the attacker making mistakes under pressure.
Which can be fatal, especially in high-stakes situations.
Absolutely. And the third outcome Greene emphasizes is the establishment of psychological dominance.
So it's not just about winning that particular battle.
It's about sending a message that you're not someone to be messed with.
That future attacks will be met with swift and decisive action.
Exactly. It's a deterrent.
I love it. So we've seen how this strategy plays out on the battlefield, but how does this apply to other areas of life?
Well, in the business world, we see this all the time. Companies that are able to turn the tables on their competitors or overcome market challenges are often the ones that thrive.
Do you have an example?
Imagine a company that's facing a hostile takeover bid. Instead of just trying to defend themselves, they suddenly announce a merger with an even larger entity.
Wow, that would completely change the game.
It would turn the tables on the would-be acquirer and put them on the defensive.
That's a great example of using the element of surprise to your advantage.
It is, and we see this in politics too.
How so?
Sometimes political figures can leverage negative press or scandals to rally their base.
Instead of just denying or apologizing, they go on the offensive.
Exactly. They might question the motives or credibility of their accusers and try to shift the narrative in their favor.
It's a risky strategy, but it can be very effective if done well.
It can, and it's a form of counterattack.
What about in our personal lives? How can we apply this strategy in our everyday interactions?
Well, standing up to bullies or anyone who tries to take advantage of you is a form of counterattack.
It's about setting boundaries and not letting people walk all over you.
Exactly. And it's not about being aggressive, or mean-spirited.
It's about being assertive and standing your ground.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A calm but firm response can be a very effective way to turn the tables on someone who's trying to bully or manipulate you.
Now let's look at a modern example of this strategy in action. Apple's comeback in the 1990s.
Ah, yes. A classic example of a company that was on the brink of collapse and then managed to completely turn things around.
They were struggling to compete with Microsoft, and many people thought they were finished.
But then Steve Jobs returned to Apple, and they launched a series of groundbreaking products that completely changed the game.
The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone.
Exactly. These products were not just incremental improvements. They were bold, innovative moves that created entirely new markets.
They didn't try to beat Microsoft at their own game.
They created their own game.
And it worked brilliantly. Apple went from being a struggling company to one of the most valuable and influential companies in the world.
It's a testament to the power of a well-timed and well-executed counterattack.
So how can we apply this strategy in our own lives? What are some concrete steps we can take?
Well, first and foremost, when you're facing a challenge or an attack, it's important to stay calm.
Don't panic.
Exactly. Take a deep breath and assess the situation objectively.
Because when you're emotional, you're more likely to make mistakes.
Precisely. Once you've calmed down, you can start to think strategically about how to respond.
And what's the next step?
The next step is to identify your opponent's weaknesses.
Their vulnerabilities.
Exactly. Everyone has weaknesses, no matter how powerful they may seem.
So you need to figure out where they're vulnerable, where they're overextended, where their blind spots are.
Precisely. Once you've identified their weaknesses, you can start to formulate your counterattack.
And timing is important, right?
Yes, you don't want to strike too soon before you're ready, but you also don't want to wait too long and miss your opportunity.
So it's about finding the right moment to strike.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that inaction can be just as dangerous as a poorly planned counterattack.
What do you mean?
If you simply absorb attacks without any resistance, you're essentially inviting more attacks.
Like you're giving them permission to keep pushing you around.
Exactly. And this can lead to a downward spiral where you become increasingly demoralized and eventually overwhelmed.
So it's important to push back.
Yes, to let them know that you're not going to be a pushover.
And history is full of examples of how a well-timed counterattack can completely change the course of events.
Absolutely. The Battle of Cannae is a great example of this.
Tell us about that one.
Hannibal was facing a much larger Roman army at Cannae.
Like David and Goliath.
Exactly. And everyone expected the Romans to win.
But Hannibal had a plan.
He did. He deliberately weakened his center, making the Romans think they were breaking through.
So the Romans charged in thinking they had the upper hand.
Exactly. But this was all part of Hannibal's trap. As the Roman legions advanced deeper, Hannibal's forces on the flanks closed in, surrounding the Roman army.
They were trapped.
Completely. And the result was a devastating defeat for the Romans.
Wow. So even when you're outnumbered, you can still turn the tables if you have a good strategy.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember that counterattacks can be risky.
You need to be careful.
Yes, if you strike back prematurely or without a clear plan, you could end up in a worse position than you were before.
So it's not just about being aggressive, it's about being strategic.
Precisely. You need to wait for the right moment to strike when your opponent is most vulnerable.
Napoleon's invasion of Russia is a good example of what not to do.
Yes. Napoleon thought he could quickly conquer Russia, but he underestimated the Russian people's resolve and the harshness of the Russian winter.
He overextended himself.
He did, and the result was a disastrous retreat that decimated his army.
So counterattacks need to be carefully planned and executed.
They do.
So to sum up, what are the key takeaways from our deep dive into the counterattack strategy?
First, stay calm under pressure.
Don't let your emotions get the better of you.
Second, identify your opponent's weaknesses.
Find their Achilles heel.
Third, strike at the right moment when they least expect it.
Use the element of surprise to your advantage.
Fourth, turn their attack into your advantage if possible.
Use their momentum against them.
And finally, be confident in your ability to turn the tables.
That's great advice. And for those of you who want to learn more about this strategy and other strategies of war, I highly recommend checking out Robert Greene's book, The 33 Strategies of War.
It's a fascinating read.
So as you go about your day, think about how you can apply the counterattack strategy to your own life.
Whether you're facing a challenging situation at work, a difficult person in your personal life, or just a general feeling of being overwhelmed, remember that you have the power to turn the tables.
To take control of the situation and come out on top.
Exactly. Turn the tables and you'll always control the game.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Until next time.
Bye, everyone.